Hello, my Access to HE Virions. Today we'll be talking about vector-borne diseases as part of the infectious disease unit. Today's topic will form under the 2020-2021 specification. I'm saying this because currently I'm teaching a part-time group on the 2019-2020 spec. They're slightly different, they're very similar, and the learning still is relevant, but today's spec is about outlining how diseases can be transmitted by vectors. And there's three real words there that we need to sort of define to start with. We've got the disease, transmission or transmitted, and a vector. So what are those three words meaning? Well, we need to go back to what a pathogen is. And if you remember, a pathogen is a microorganism that has the ability to infect and cause disease. Now, it's only termed a disease when there is a problem with the human system. So, for example, we're very familiar with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes COVID-19. That's the name of the disease, and the transmission route would be mainly by air, by droplets in the air getting into your respiratory system. So it's very important for me to first of all establish that the name of the pathogen is different to the name of the disease, and sometimes that gets lost in translation when students are learning about it. Other examples may be HIV is a virus that causes the disease AIDS, autoimmune deficiency syndrome, and that transmission there is by sexual intercourse. Any other examples that I can think of off the top of my head? No, I'm going to leave it at that. You get the idea. So what we're specifically looking at in this aspect of the course is vector-borne diseases. Vector-borne diseases. So when you look into it, there's a very wide-ranging set of definitions for what a vector is, but generally the most commonly accepted one is this. A vector in terms of infectious disease are blood-feeding arthropods such as mosquitoes, ticks, sandflies, tsetse flies, and biting midges. So the things that will bite you and then pass on the pathogen to another person. And in so doing so, they transmit the disease from one person to the next. And this is the definition that's used by the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, so that's quite a reliable source. If you're interested, there's a nice article down here which debates the different definitions of what a vector is, but it's not recommended. It's not compulsory reading. So here's a list of vector-borne diseases that it's not an exhaustive list according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, but you can see the vector down here. That's the type of biting arthropod that's causing the transmission. This is the name of the disease that's caused, and this is the type of pathogen or type of microorganism that causes disease down the right hand side. So you've got some examples there, and when you look back at the criteria, it says explain how vector-borne diseases are caused. In fact, let me flick back. Explain how different vectors are able to transmit disease. Here you can give a variety of different examples. Here are the different vectors. These are the different vectors, and these are the diseases that they are caused by, and also what type of pathogen they're caused by. Now, virus we're okay with. We know what the structure and function of a virus is, and also bacteria, we're okay with that. Now, what we see in here is something called a parasite. And I put a note down here that parasites, there's three types of parasites. And one aspect of this vector-borne disease that I'm going to go into is malaria. Malaria is caused by Anopheles mosquito, and here we are, it's a parasite. But I know very well that that parasite is a plasmodium. It's a type of parasite. So in this note down here on the left, I just wanted to explain that there are 3 different types of parasites. So where you're seeing parasite on this right hand side, they're not all the same parasite. It could be one of 3. And I've put those on the left hand side down here. Okay, so I just wanted to remind ourselves about the criteria, because actually in the assignment brief it only says outline. So outline is really a descriptive word in the assignment brief. So you're not really going to be going into a massive amount of detail. It doesn't form a huge part of your assignment, but it does need to be done well if you're going to get those high grades that you want. So what I like to encourage you to do is to try and explain how vectors cause disease in line with something called the chain of infection. And the chain of infection is something that's well accepted in medical fields, because it can be applied to any infection. Now we're talking about vectors today, but it could be any type of infection, not just vectors. So for example, we can talk about the pathogen first, and the pathogen could be a virus, or it could be a bacteria, or a plasmodium, or a fungi, for example. And that's the actual name of the pathogen. Now the cycle of infection starts with identifying the reservoir. So the reservoir is where that pathogen grows, replicates. You know, that's where you find that pathogen. In order for an infection to take place, that pathogen has to get out of its reservoir. Now when we talk about a reservoir, that could be water. You could find a virus or a bacterium or a plasmodium in a water source, or you could find it also in a food source. Humans could be a reservoir for certain pathogens. I'm just trying to think. Objects could be reservoirs for certain types of pathogens. So in order for this pathogen, which could be in any of these reservoirs, to cause an infection and disease in another person, or transmit from, let's say, food into another person, you have to have a portal of exit, and that's the way out of the reservoir. The way out of the reservoir. So the portal of exit. And the route of transmission is how it gets from place A to the human being that it's infecting. How is it travelling from one to the next? And generally there are 4 or 5 different accepted versions. I would get a definition and a clarification from a reliable source, but we're mainly talking about air, we're talking about touch, that is a T if you believe me, touch. It could be a vector, so it could be a tick or a mosquito or sandfly. It could be digestive, so it could be food-based. And I think that's they're the 4 major ways, and you'll probably correct me if there's some others, but you can find a definition of those. That's what the route of transmission is. It's how the method by which the pathogen goes from the reservoir to its host. And likewise, opposite is the portal of entry. Now, portal just means door or window. It's just a way in or out. So the portal of entry is the way into the new host. Way into new host. How does it get in? Is it through the respiratory system? Is it through the urinal system? Is it through a bite in the skin? Whatever. Now, the host has to be susceptible. So if infection and disease is going to happen, then a susceptible host needs to be found. Now, some pathogens may well find themselves to a particular person that might not even cause infection or disease. So that person, that host, has to be susceptible, that has to be receptive to the pathogen. And once that pathogen has made its way into a susceptible host, that's when that person then will become a reservoir. It doesn't have to be a person, could be something else, but we're talking about human infection here, so that's what I'm using it as. That person then can become a reservoir, and then that can, and hopefully you can see that it's just it's a circle that will go round and round and round and round, and that's what the pathogens are trying to do, is to go around on a cycle of infection. Well, you as health professionals have the responsibility of trying to interject in this. So if we can stop as health professionals any point in this chain of infection, then we can stop people getting ill, we can stop people getting sick, and we can hopefully try and eradicate that pathogen from existence. So this is an example of an article on the Nursing Times. I've put the copy in your Google Classroom. If you can't find it, let me know. I recommend you read the whole article. This is not just the whole article, but it does give you examples of how healthcare professionals interject at each different stage between the host, the reservoir, the portal of exit, etc. And there are different things, lots of it is common sense, like wearing PPE and washing hands and that kind of stuff. But there are very, very different ways of stopping this chain of infection. Read the article. It also gives you definitions of each of these different stages as well, which you could use for your assignment if you wish. And it's a very, very reliable source. Start engaging with the Nursing Times. It's not necessarily, or it isn't a part of this assignment, so you don't need to go into preventative measures in terms of the cycle of infection. But what I would hope that you can do is to explain how certain diseases are transmitted by vectors. So let's give you an example, or here's some examples from the world, and I just thought that's quite a nice graphic that I created that shows you the different vector-borne diseases, but mainly occur in subtropical regions where mosquitoes are prevalent, and obviously you want these kind of, they want to be in areas where they can live in hot, humid, moist conditions, and that's where you'll find the prevalence of these conditions. They aren't just, malaria is obviously not just limited to Africa. It's all over the world, but that's just the prevalence of them. And I thought it gave you a nice balanced view of some of the different vector-borne diseases. The example I've chosen to do is malaria. It's close to my heart. My sister developed malaria when we both travelled to Ghana back in the day, and so it's caused by the Plasmodium. So remember that we defined the different terms at the start of this session, in that the pathogen is different to the actual disease. It's a different name. So malaria is caused by one of 4 species of Plasmodium, which are there. Plasmodium, I'll do my best to pronounce them, falciparum, vivax, ovale, and malariae. Now, falciparum, according to the documents, is the most lethal and is the most prevalent amongst the population. So that's the kind of pathogen. Plasmodium. It's not a virus, not a bacteria, it's a plasmodium. And obviously the disease that it does cause is malaria. So let's have a look at the sort of transmission route. Well, it's kind of a cycle. The reservoir would be the infected person, and it's passed between infected humans. Basically, it's passed from an infected human. So let's say this human is let's just suppose it's chicken and egg, really. Let's say that this person is affected. This person has malaria, and the first stage would be for the infected mosquito, the Anopheles mosquito, female Anopheles mosquito, to take a bite, to take a blood meal out of an infected human. That that plasmodium then from the bloodstream would I think I've taken this the wrong way. Let me reset there. Yeah, okay, so this is an infected mosquito, right? So this has the plasmodium in its saliva, so which is number 2. Why didn't I read it? Plasmodium in the mosquito saliva is injected into the blood whilst taking a blood meal. So it actually is sucking up blood, but it actually deposits plasmodium into the blood. The plasmodium travel round the blood stream and interject and find their way into the liver, where they replicate even more, they multiply. So when they multiply in enough numbers, they actually find their way into erythrocytes, and within the erythrocyte they start replicating, and they replicate so much that the red blood cells burst. Now you can imagine that red blood cells bursting causes problems with sort of lethargy and delivery of oxygen, for example, because some, as it says here, some more plasmodia invade other erythrocytes, and the same thing happens. They replicate, burst, and that carries on. So plasmodium in the blood starts rising because they replicate inside the blood. Now, what happens then is that, it adapts. It can develop into other plasmodium that can be taken up by a mosquito. So what happens there is that a mosquito then will take a blood meal from an infected person, and as they're sucking up the blood, it'll go into the digestive system, into the intestine, where the plasmodium can replicate in the salivary gland. So it migrates to the salivary gland, sorry, it replicates in the digestive system, but it moves to the salivary glands right there. And so when that mosquito then goes and takes another blood meal on a different human, then that plasmodium from the salivary gland seeps or gets injected into the next susceptible host, and so the cycle really starts happening again. I kind of got a bit messed up there, but hopefully you still get the idea, in that it's kind of a cycle, in that people get infected, plasmodium replicates inside the blood, the mosquitoes take a blood meal, it then replicates inside them, and the saliva, when they take another blood meal, then passes it on to the next sort of susceptible host. So hopefully you can see how that works. So when we're talking about the assignment, which is what you really want to know, is then what I'd like to try and do is to link it to this cycle of transmission. So you've got the pathogen is the plasmodium causing malaria, and the reservoir would be an infected human in this case. I don't think there are cases of malaria being passed from animals. Now the portal of exit would be the skin. It would be a break in the skin through the mosquito's suction pipe, whatever that's called. I can't think of it on the top of my head. And the route of transmission obviously would be a vector, because that's what we're doing. It's a vector-borne transmission. So that would then obviously take another blood meal from a susceptible host, and the plasmodium from the salivary glands would then travel into a susceptible host and would cause malaria. That person then would become the reservoir, and it would happen again and again. So really what you've got to try and do is, I would say, start with some definitions of what vectors are and what disease and pathogens are, if you haven't done already in your assignment. And then I would sort of introduce the cycle of infection, and then possibly explain how the different vectors can cause different diseases. And then I would go into one of your choice, go into detail about one vector-borne disease of your choice. Now I've done malaria, you can do many other different diseases, but what I would do is identify the different types, like I identified at the start on the table, this one. So here is like an overview. This is a kind of umbrella. These are the different diseases that can be caused by vector-borne diseases. But then I'd expect you to go into at least one in detail about how that transmission occurs. So in malaria, you can see that it's transmitted by or from an infected individual, and it shows you a little bit about the science behind how that pathogen replicates and how it's passed in relation to the cycle of infection. I'm hoping I'm getting that across so that you can basically apply the cycle of infection to a particular vector-borne disease of your choice. Now I'm quite happy for you to do malaria, but also I would be very happy for you to look at some different ones of your choice, just to sort of give you a flavour of how different vector-borne diseases are transmitted. For example, and I just picked out a couple here. So typhus is a bacterial vector-borne disease where it's transmitted of people that have acute typhus fever, and these lice, so body lice, basically excrete this onto the skin, and whilst feeding on a second host, become infected when they crush the fecal matter into the bite wound. And that would be, I thought, an interesting vector-borne disease for you to go away and sort of do a bit of research. What you're looking for is the different components of the infection cycle. You have to have a particular focus on how it's transmitted. So how is it transmitted between one to the next? Is it human to human? Is it animal to human? But it has to be, in order to be a vector-borne disease, it has to end up infecting and causing disease in a human. We're not looking at viruses and bacteria that infect cows or pigs or anything like that. I'll leave you to read those two bits of paragraph, but it gives you a flavour of what's kind of expected in the assignment, because I get people just saying vector-borne diseases are caused by mosquitoes, ticks and flies. They bite a host and then they pass it on to the next. Well, that's not going to cut the mustard for a high standard assignment. What I'm after is for you to give an overview of the different vectors and the different diseases that are caused by pathogens, specifically vector-borne diseases, and then along with some nice definitions, is to try and apply the cycle of infection, or the chain of infection, to one specific vector-borne disease of your choice. And in that, I'm looking for some science. I'm looking for how is that pathogen transmitted. And it's not an exhaustive thing. It's not meant to take up a massive amount of word count. It's there for you to show your understanding of vector-borne diseases. Okay, I'm not going to waffle on any longer. I hope it helps. And what I would do is recommend you read the article on the chain of infection for healthcare practitioners, because it is useful. Okay, hope that helps. On to another.